industry on parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
Donora, Pennsylvania, the town where in 1948, 20 persons died and many others were prostrated by unique weather and topographical conditions that held a dense smog close to the ground for several days. This is Donora today, an industrial city that's one of the cleanest in the entire Monongahela Valley. A community full of pride and civic spirit that faced up to an old problem and conquered it. Leading local industry is the Donora Works, American Steel and Wire Division of United States Steel. Though the company had good reason to believe its smoke was not a contributing factor in the deaths, the plant had been making smoke and set about eliminating it once and for all. Water from the river was sprayed into the flues through which poured gases from the company's 2 blast furnaces. The dust-carrying water is channeled into this artificial lake, where it settles to the bottom. Meanwhile, gas cleaned by the water can now be used to heat boilers. The dust-laden water looks like this when it pours into the pool, but when it's returned to the Monongahela, it's cleaner than when it was taken out. From the bottom of the pool, a sludge is pumped to the Oliver filter, which removes still more of the water, leaving a substance that's about 75% solid. Vacuum pumps pull the liquid through the filter cloth, and the flue dust that cakes on the outside is loosened by expanding and contracting the discs. It can then be easily scraped off. Why go to all this trouble with the particles that otherwise would have blown off into the atmosphere? Partly because it would be almost as harmful to dump them into the river as to shoot them into the air, but also because there are valuable minerals in this sludge. It's almost 50% iron. Mixed with coke dust, it's fused under a gas flame into ore-bearing sinter that can be sent to the blast furnaces, eventually to wind up as steel. 80 tons are collected in this way every day. In addition to the elaborate precautions we've seen, the company further guards the atmosphere of the community by maintaining its own weather bureau, and when conditions threaten to duplicate those of October 1948, suspending operations. The result? A town as pleasant to work and live in as you're likely to come across. The streets are clean, and many of the houses are white, something unusual for a steel town. The weekly washes are white too, even when left out all day. The civic pride of Donora has greater outlets than ever, now that the sun shines down on it without being filtered through smog, and grocers can display their products right out on the sidewalk. Citizens can boast not only of their Cracker Jack football team and the fact that Stan Musial came from here, not only of the varied skills of Donora's industrial workers and the statewide reputation of its Clan Grant Kilty Band, but also of the fact that they live in a place now more than ever worth living in. That's Donora today.
Since 1939, inflation has been chipping away at our 100-cent dollar until today it is worth only 52 cents in the grocery store or the savings bank. Unless we check further inflation, there is no telling how much the value of our dollar will slip. Certainly, none of us wants a 25-cent or a 10-cent dollar. The way to curb additional inflation and start building a sound, healthy dollar is for all of us to increase production. We must insist that our government practice strict economy, cut out all waste and extravagance, and balance the federal budget by a realistic tax policy.
Know how many hours of labor go into the building of an average house of 4 rooms and a bath? It's estimated to be more than 1,300 hours, and well over a third of them are devoted to work like this. The painstaking, muscle-bending work of the carpenter. Here's what's involved just in chiseling out a hinge seat for a door. The Porter Cable Machine Company of Syracuse, New York, is one of a number of firms seeking to ease the workload of the carpenter, making it possible for him to do more work and better work with less effort by letting machines do the muscle bending for him. Porter Cable manufactures an extensive line of sanders, routers, shapers, and other woodworking tools, including the portable electric saw we see being assembled here. Into the basic frame of the saw is fitted the field coil, heart of a motor that will drive the saw blade at upwards of 3,000 revolutions per minute. While the screws are tightened on top, pneumatic screwdrivers simultaneously insert other screws from below. Now the motor's ready to receive the armature, the part that spins inside the field coil and turns the shaft that turns the blade. The saw is now pretty well complete, and of course, many operations not shown have preceded the installation of the pistol-type grip. A portable saw seems to be a fairly simple thing, but the engineers who designed it had to keep a lot of factors constantly in mind. The weight had to be kept down, so the user could work with it all day without tiring, and also handle it easily on scaffolds or overhead. It had to have perfect balance. It had to be safe so non-professionals could also use it. Hence, accessories like the safety swing guard. Hence also the extensive tests that double-check on the saw's electrical system for safety factors as well as for performance. But the important thing about power tools to the nation as a whole is that they enable our skilled craftsmen to increase their output manyfold without a Soviet-type speed-up. The result? More income for the construction worker and more homes at less cost for the many families who need them. Even the job of preparing the hinge seat for a door can be handled mechanically with a tool called a router. And the hinge fits perfectly on the first try. That's an added dividend resulting from the use of 20th century tools for 20th century jobs. When cut, sanded, mortised, or shaped by machine, the parts really go together. America's construction industry has put up more than 1 million private dwellings a year since the end of World War II. Mechanization helped accomplish this amazing record and promises to bring even more impressive achievements in the future.
Midwest Research Institute in Kansas City. 6 buildings and a couple of hundred scientific specialists. There's a 12-man company in Omaha that can call on any or all of these chemists, physicists, and engineers to solve industrial problems as they crop up. How can a 12-man firm afford it? All by itself, it can't. But 400 firms of all sizes can. And that's how many got together in 1944 to set up Midwest Research Institute. Since then, the Institute has tackled nearly 1,000 research projects, solving most of them. Such widely diverse projects as developing a new way to make glass fibers, eliminating caking in fertilizer, finding out why a metalworking firm was being forced to reject so much of its output. This researcher, working with a fluidizer, is seeking better methods for drying solids like salt, grain, sugar, and chemicals. The labs here are equipped with every imaginable sort of Buck Rogers equipment, like the X-ray machine that will show up the internal structure of a metal casting. The nonprofit organization performs jobs like this at cost, and costs for the projects it has taken on have ranged from $25 to more than $100,000. The X-ray shows up a flaw. The spectrograph is an instrument in which substances are burned, and their composition is determined by the colors the flame gives off. Further analysis is possible on the spectroscope, in which color films made on the spectrograph are examined. The electron microscope, utilizing the principles of radar and television, permits an object to be magnified many more times than would be possible with mere lenses. It can blow up the picture to 100,000 times its normal size. Developing new products, perfecting old ones, recommending where and how new plants should be built. Services opening new horizons for the entire Midwest.
In America, thousands of true life success stories are being written every day. Here we have the opportunity to make of our lives whatever we care to make of them, and there is no limit. Men starting at the bottom have every opportunity to climb to the top. This constant movement of men upwards in the ranks of business is one reason why American industry has never stopped progressing. Someone is always carrying a new idea up the ladder. This, in turn, helps everyone, for always new ideas, constant improvements of methods and products mean higher living standards for all Americans.
The XA-6, Pulse Jet Helicopter, the ultimate in mechanical simplicity. First flown as recently as 1951, it's already been replaced by a newer model in production at the American Helicopter Company of Manhattan Beach, California. The assignment given the firm's engineers by the Army was to build a helicopter that would serve as a sort of airborne jeep. Off the drawing boards came designs for the equipment that would produce such a vehicle. The watchword at every turn was, make it compact, make it rugged, make it powerful. Quite an order, considering it also had to be collapsible, so it could be towed in a small trailer or dropped by parachute. But they cut and paired and invented things like miniature balance panels that do everything the older, larger type did. Ruggedness is tested on a fatigue machine that creates conditions far worse than the copter will ever actually encounter in the air. The simplicity of the craft that we see here being assembled has another advantage. It reduces maintenance problems almost to the vanishing point. At the company's plant in Mesa, Arizona, where its jet engines are produced, they test the tiny power plants that'll burn kerosene, low-test gasoline, aviation gasoline, even diesel oil. The result of this remarkable industry armed forces teamwork, in less than a year and a half, the XH-26 goes into production, one of the most amazing aircraft ever developed. It'll carry a 600-pound payload, twice its own weight. With no gears, no hydraulic system, no transmission, it has only one moving part. Its usefulness to the Army for artillery observation, evacuation of wounded, and transportation of supplies is obvious. But its simplicity, safety, and economy of operation also suggest great possibilities for air-minded civilians when Uncle Sam's needs are met.
Industry on Parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
Here's a family in Missouri, or it could be Minnesota or Massachusetts, enjoying the ballet by television. Live performers going through their paces at this very moment, hundreds or thousands of miles away in New York. And they might just as well be right in that distant living room. The images and the sounds from this New York studio have a long way to travel in converting much of the country into one big theater. First to the control room just off the studio, where technicians study the quality of the picture and sound being received, and by remote control, move cameras, microphones, or lights to improve them. The steps of the dancers and notes of music have been translated into electrical impulses, and now those impulses are channeled into the wires of the bell system, which carry them to a broadcasting tower for transmission to local viewers and at the same time to a telephone communications building to be relayed to the rest of the country. From now on, transmission of the image from city to city is in the hands of the bell technicians. This program is being carried, on part of its journey at least, by coaxial cable. Here in Philadelphia, another control room, another check on the image. Westward and southward it goes from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh and on to the West Coast, or to Baltimore, Washington, and on to Miami. Sometimes by coaxial cable under the ground, sometimes by radio relay beamed through the air from point to point. With radio relay, the program is piped to a big square-faced horn on the roof of the telephone building. This horn is an antenna for sending a special kind of radio waves. It concentrates the waves into a very narrow beam and aims them with the accuracy of a fine rifle toward a tower many miles away, usually about 30 miles away. At this tower, a similar horn captures the signal and channels it through a series of amplifiers that build up its power. Just as the mounts of the old Pony Express tired during their sprints from outpost to outpost, so the microwave signal weakens. But the signal can be restored again, amplified 1,000,000 times or more, and kept speeding along. As our program passes through cities that have television, the sound and picture are fed to a local broadcasting station, and the show goes out in all directions for the benefit of viewers in the area. But these facilities for carrying images from one end of the country to the other were not developed solely to bring entertainment into the home. In fact, long before network television, Bell scientists were working on coaxial cable and radio relay as a means of transmitting hundreds of telephone conversations simultaneously, ensuring the swift passage of friendly conversations as well as messages vital to the national defense.
Many of us take our American freedom for granted. Often we're too busy to attend local town meetings to discuss mutual problems with our neighbors. When we become apathetic to local and state issues, it is bound to extend to national affairs. For instance, since 1880, the proportion of eligible voters who actually cast their ballots has been decreasing. In the 1948 presidential election, only 51% voted. It's time all of us took our civic responsibility more seriously. Remember, your vote will help ensure your freedom in the future.
In automobiles, on farms, behind the scenes of industry, just about everywhere there's a machine, you'll find a V-belt, that endless loop of fabric and rubber used for transmitting power. This attractive plant in Denver, home of the Gates Rubber Company, is the world's largest producer of V-belts and also turns out great quantities of hose, tires, and other products whose basic ingredient is rubber, natural or synthetic. Natural or synthetic, the rubber goes first to a mixer known as the Banbury, where it is blended according to formula. Oils, chemicals, carbon black, and other ingredients are added. After being thoroughly mixed and kneaded into a uniform mass, the rubber moves along to a calender or coating machine, which coats cords or fabric with rubber for later use in hose, tires, and V-belts. Before being coated with rubber, cords are first treated with special adhesives, which guarantee a firm bond between the cords and their rubber coating. Gates uses special instruments on this calendar to ensure a uniform rubber coating. These instruments use radioactive isotopes from our atomic energy plants. Here, an experienced tire builder begins to build a tire. Several layers or plies of rubber-coated cords will be added like this before the tread is applied and the tire shaped and vulcanized. These giant, automatically controlled vulcanizers give tires their familiar shape and impress the tread pattern. Vulcanization imparts the necessary strength to the tread and cord body. Every tire is given exactly the proper curing for toughness and long life. But it is V-belts that lead the Gates line, from tiny bands that move a radio dial to heavy-duty belts on machines and industry. V-belts are made of rubber and cords, formed in large, flat sheets. These razor-sharp knives cut the sheet into many V-shaped belts. You've noticed this familiar V shape on your automobile fan belt. V-belts at the top of the list of products turned out by this flourishing organization, which since its founding more than 40 years ago has never failed to expand with every passing year.
Here's a young lady helping Grandma walk the baby while her doll rides in the same comfort. Thanks to the Welsh Company of St. Louis, world's largest manufacturer of folding baby carriages and of exact replicas in doll size. The trend in toys in recent years has been toward more and more realism. When little girls ask for a carriage like Mother's, they expect it to be just like it. And by applying the same skill and attention to the building of the miniatures that they give the full-size models, the people of Welsh make sure those little girls aren't disappointed. Here's how tires are installed on carriage wheels, large and small. Rubber molded around a wire core is pulled back and the ends of the wire are joined. The next man operates a machine that pulls the rubber back over the joint snug and tight. They have as many as 200,000 carriage wheels in stock here at one time. The body of the carriage, sometimes called the basket, is covered with leatherette, bound and trimmed. Metal frames are inserted into the carriage hood. The frames are riveted permanently in place. Body, hood, and collapsible chassis come together for assembly. During World War II, Welsh produced cots, duffel bags, and other military equipment for the armed forces. When the war ended, no industry had to get back into civilian production any faster than this one, to supply carriages for the millions of babies born in the post-war years. Later, there was a corresponding call for doll carriages, when half of those new citizens became old enough to demand them. After inspection, the carriages collapsed, and the wheels are tucked in with the rest of the carriage for some young miss who simply won't sleep until she has a carriage suitable for her favorite doll. An awful lot of childhood pleasure rolls out of this plant every year.
Nearly every American family can now afford an automobile, a radio and television set, a refrigerator and washing machine. Because of American managerial experience and know-how, improved machines and techniques, plus the millions of skilled men and women on the production lines in the nation's plants and factories, all of us have come to consider yesterday's luxuries as today's necessities. And our industrial progress continues. Each year, American industry spends $1 billion on research to improve current products or to invent new ones.
Several young ladies with an old idea devote a lunch hour to consideration of wedding and engagement rings at their local jewelers. A great deal more consideration has been given those same rings at the New York plant of J.R. Wood & Sons Incorporated. Styles in rings change, as they do with anything else, and designers must stay constantly ahead of the times. But in the processing of the precious metals that go into the rings, the methods are the same as those used by gold and silver smiths for centuries past. Pure 24-karat gold goes into the crucible with silver, copper, or zinc to form a much tougher 14-karat alloy. The craftsman who handles this painstaking blending of metals is Herman Dagner, who's been with the company more than 50 years. Pure gold is much too soft to be converted directly into rings, but the other metals give it the necessary hardness for many years of wear. After cooling, the bar forms are put through a press that rolls them down to the thickness required. After this rolling, they'll get a heat treatment that will fix the internal structure of the metal. The very popular plain gold wedding band here takes its first shape in a blanking machine that stamps circles of gold out of the bar. The unfinished rings fall into the drawer below. They are then squeezed, slipped on a spindle, and further shaped under pressure of 25 tons. This step adds to the ring's tensile strength. The turning off process shaves the ring to the desired width. Each year, some $40,000 worth of gold dust is sifted from floors, wash basins, every corner of the plant. In addition to art-carved wedding bands, the firm produces great quantities of precision-cut diamond engagement rings bearing the same trademark. Although it was this company that helped develop the now standard practice of both men and women wearing wedding bands, as of now, their engagement rings are designed exclusively for the fair sex. The craftsmen of J.R. Wood are kept very busy supplying people who are probably the happiest customers any industry ever had. Industry on Parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
Chicago, after many decades, still the railroad capital of America. Served by 24 different lines, this city, whose 120 years of growth have closely paralleled the growth of our American railroad system, still depends for much of its vigor on the iron horses. Only now, the iron horses are more likely to be made of stainless steel and gleaming aluminum. Inside, the cars get the same thorough going over between runs, especially Pullmans, the cars on which cleanliness, comfort, and convenience have been supreme since Abraham Lincoln rode the first Pullman sleeping car nearly a century ago. These deluxe accommodations are now accepted as a matter of course on any overnight train trip, an established part of our way of traveling. Yet the demands of the 59 railroads that own the Pullman Company do not allow the slightest relaxation of standards that have advanced higher and higher through the years as the railroads went out to meet the competition of other forms of transportation. Here at the company's laboratory and testing bureau, there are daily demonstrations of how the people of Pullman respond to the challenge. Even soap is tested to make sure it has the specified cleansing properties and purity. Other materials used on the trains get the same careful scrutiny. Sheets chosen at random are spread out for examination under the magnifying glass. In the tensile testing machine, samples are ripped apart to make sure they won't do the same when some snoozing passenger rolls over in his sleep. The power is turned on and the stretch begins. As the pull is applied, the cloth is bound to give. These Pullman technicians just want to make sure it doesn't give too soon. The company spent 11 years in developing a spring and rubber mattress, now used on sleeping cars throughout the country. It's surprising how much work is done to make a Pullman the spotless, well-appointed vehicle it is when we step aboard. The immense amount of clean laundry that must be stowed away. Each compartment must be cleaned and equipped with towels, soap, and paper cups. But little Miss Traveler is blissfully unaware. She has a reservation for a compartment to Los Angeles, and she's supremely confident it'll be waiting for her. Needless to say, it is, though she'll never know how many people have been crawling over, into, and under that compartment in the past few hours to make it ready for her. Across the country, there are 6,000 sleeping cars like this rolling in all directions, at this moment carrying individuals and families on business trips to New Orleans, vacation trips to New England, or emergency trips to anywhere. The porter calls attention to some of the latest conveniences. Push-button control of just about everything but the speed of the train. The knobs regulate air conditioning, lights, temperature control, and one that calls the porter. So our California-bound traveler settles back to a pleasant excursion across prairies and mountains, confident in the knowledge that America's railroads will get her there safely and on time, while the people of the Pullman Company see to it that her trip is a happy one.
In America, nearly all of us are investors. When we save money, we invest it one way or another. We may invest it directly in a business of our own or buy stocks or bonds. We may deposit it in a bank or buy building and loan shares or a life insurance policy. And these agencies, in turn, invest our savings for us. As a matter of fact, anyone who saves in any of these forms is an investor. Today, there are more than 14 million stockholders in American industry. Then there are the 70 million who have savings accounts and the 83 million who hold insurance policies. Added up, it means nearly every family has a stake in this nation's investment.
Introducing at 147 pounds in the dark trunks from New York City. Yes, the dark trunks are from New York City. And so are the boxer's head protector, mouthpiece, hand wraps, and just about all the other equipment he uses. Here at the Everlast Sporting Goods plant in Manhattan, we're about to follow a piece of select sheepskin along until it becomes a finished boxing glove. After being cut by leather experts who know exactly how and where it will stretch, the two parts of the glove are sewed together with the lining on the outside, since actually these gloves are inside out. The leather is sure to leave room for a pocket into which the stuffing will go. Before that stuffing can be inserted, the glove must be turned. This will leave the outside of the glove smooth and bury rough seams in the padding where they can't cut or scratch an opponent. The gloves are stuffed with specially prepared cattle hair, very springy, very soft, light in weight, and processed so it won't separate when the glove is in use and expose hard knuckles beneath the leather. After being bound, laced, and inspected, the gloves, in more than 40 styles and models for championship fights, training, amateur bouts, and for children, are packed for shipment. Only one of the products of a firm of specialists that has done much in recent decades to standardize boxing equipment. Standardize it at a level that reduces injuries in this popular sport to a minimum. Safety guard gloves, head guards for protection of forehead, temples, and ears, safety equipment for the ring like rope wrappings and floor pads. All part of the line of a company that has made boxing its business and wants to see that business flourish and grow.
Ever wonder, as you watch your television set, where all the hundreds of filmed commercials come from? If you've given it any thought, you've probably said New York and Hollywood. And that's partly right. But the biggest producer of theater and television advertising films is not on either coast. It's the Alexander Film Company of Colorado Springs, Colorado. As much thought and preparation will be given to an advertiser's one-minute commercial, as much care used in the casting of actors as you'd find in the production of films of much greater length. And on the set, men and women of long experience give their all to put over the brief sales message of the man who pays the bills for all the fabulously expensive entertainment and information we get by means of television. The soundtrack is usually added after the film has been shot. And here again, experience pays off. For there are many steps through which a piece of film must pass and many opportunities for the quality to suffer unless all the many technicians are on their toes. Animations, or illustrations that move, require more than 2,000 separate hand drawings for 1 minute's running time. Those drawings are transferred to film on a machine called the optical printer. Just one of the many special machines needed to extend the amazing effects, the drama, and the interest of television to those brief messages from an indispensable man, the sponsor.
As Americans, we have faith in the ability of men and women to govern themselves. We believe the decision of the majority is, for the most part, the voice of wisdom. There may be times when we are led astray by emotion or false prophecies, but in the long run, the average opinion of all the people is more reliable than that of an individual or a small group of individuals. Without such faith, self-government becomes impossible. If we are to serve the cause of democracy, we must reaffirm and strengthen our confidence in the individual citizen, which really means confidence in ourselves.
Harvest time in the tobacco fields of Connecticut, and helping with the harvesting are more than 1,200 teenagers from out of state. These attractive and very industrious young ladies are among the 90 who came up from Florida to work for 8 to 12 weeks on farms around the town of Melrose. The farmers who employ them pay for their round-trip transportation, and all aspects of the girls' junket in the north must conform to strict requirements of the Federal Employment Service, as well as the employment services of Florida and Connecticut. Mothers whose daughters usually dawdle over their lunch would be amazed to see them now. They hold their own with the boys, not only in the storing away of food, but in the filling of baskets with tobacco leaves as well. Those baskets are brought by trailer truck to sheds where the leaves are sorted and sold onto laths to be hung up to cure for 6 to 8 weeks. There's one supervisor for about every 12 girls, both in the field and at the camps in which they stay. The girls pick up special skills in a hurry. The youngsters have to be at least 15 to take part in the project, and most of them are between 15 and 18. Returning to camp, the first order of business is mail call. Mighty important business to a young lady who's away from home for perhaps the first time in her life. But it's hard to stay lonely for long, especially if you're the star pitcher or batter on one of the softball teams, or looking forward to the annual Harvest Festival in Hartford that climaxes the season. With all the talk of juvenile delinquency, it's good to be reminded occasionally that the vast majority of American youth consists of healthy, normal youngsters like these.